Digital documents move around. There are different versions of them. There are these proposals, like what Bob Kahn's doing, to develop identifiers that are attached to the document and not attached to a website or a particular server. That has real applications in a lot of exciting new businesses. And I think that's going to drive that development, DOI. And you're not going to get a domain name for each document. You're not going to necessarily need the domain name. The DOI is run with a totally different hierarchy, a totally different technology than the domain name system. So that's what I'm talking about, is not replacing the DNS, just as we move to a world with 100 or 1,000 times more objects and resources online, we're not going to see the domain name system grow by a factor of 100. We're going to see other things grow instead, and that's where you have opportunities if you can be nimble enough to move into those new areas. And if you can see ways to leverage your domain name business in this new world. I'm not an expert in DNS strategy. I don't pretend to be. My goal today is to be provocative, to pose some opportunities and questions, to scare you a little bit. I hope I've succeeded. And I'm very happy to talk offline about where these opportunities are. The real question is going to be how the community comes together around the standards for ONS, grid technologies, document identification systems, because everybody has their own idea about how to do it. Not only do we have to find superior technology, we also have to have viable business models. But when it all comes together, and when we have open source, open standards-based systems like we have with the DNS, I think we're going to see a real shift in how people find things online. And that's my point. I have a class that I'm teaching in the fall called How to Predict the Futures. Because no one can predict the future. We can, however, talk about different possible scenarios and how to prepare for those different scenarios. And I hope all of you are thinking about some of these scenarios because they're very exciting, both for your companies and for the user. But we have to be thinking about them now if we're going to get there. Great question.
Dankeschön, beantwortet. Weitere Fragen bitte. Wer ist der Nächste? Oder die Nächste, eine Dame vielleicht? Bitte schön, der Herr. Einen kleinen Moment, das Mikrofon kommt schon.
Stefan Legner, guten Tag. Ich frage auf Deutsch. Sie stehen hier vor einem Gremium aus Internet-Experten und auch eine ganze Reihe von Entscheidern. Sie haben sehr deutlich die Zukunft aufgezeigt. Gibt es aktuelle Bedrohungen, Threats, vor denen Sie explizit warnen wollen, weil Sie sagen, an dieser Stelle müsste aktuell wirklich etwas getan werden, weil das sonst den Weg, so wie Sie es vorgezeichnet haben, verbauen würde?
One reason I like to talk about the future is that it's less risky than talking about the present. But let me focus on two issues that I personally am quite concerned about. One, of course, is DNSSEC and how that is implemented. We have a good standard there. We have a technology that is growing. The importance of implementing that technology is growing every day. We're seeing more and more viruses that are trying to attack and spoof the domain name system. We need something like DNSSEC deployed. But we can't figure out how to do it. We can't figure out who's going to be sort of the root. I know the Department of Homeland Security at one point stood up and said, "We'll do it." They stopped saying that after about 2 days when they saw the reaction. But we have to find that solution. The other thing that I'm very concerned about is, and it's a very complicated area, but the question of internationalized domain names and what the Chinese and some Arab consortia are doing, independent of the worldwide global community, is somewhat scary. And it has the potential to create a more fragmented internet. We've been making slow progress on internationalized domain names because it's very hard to get a global consensus on something so complicated. I think there is very clearly a global consensus that we don't want one or two groups deciding that they're going to control the language of the internet for their region and their culture. This needs to be done in a cooperative way that really will allow the internet to stay the end-to-end medium that it is. So that's two things I'm following closely. I'm very alarmed about. The other thing that you probably got out of my talk is that I'm quite alarmed about some of the authentication technologies that are being proposed. And what Microsoft is doing with card space sounds very good this week, very dangerous next week, because it's not quite clear what they're doing. They say the right things about interoperability and open standards, but then you look at how some of it's being implemented and you start to wonder. And if we don't get this right, if authentication is not done properly, we're going to move up into the left corner and proprietary standards will dominate. We'll lose the power of the web, the ability to use different browsers to do applications, and that's critical. We have to watch that issue, and this community, because of your expertise, can help drive us in an open standards direction. And I think Shibboleth, I know Switch has been very involved in Shibboleth, which is an open standards-based system for authentication. It has privacy built in. It's being implemented by hundreds of different organizations. I think that's a model, a much better model than what I see from CardSpace or some of the other proprietary solutions. So those are three things I'm worried about and alarmed about, but we can talk some more offline about the details. I probably should let the next speaker up here. I want to hear Wolfgang as much as you do, particularly because we don't always agree.
Gut, das heißt,